The path beyond the necromancer's chamber led the group into the citadel's core, a labyrinth of jagged stone and flickering shadows. The oppressive heat of the maw was gone, replaced by a cold that seeped into their very bones. The air carried a faint, rhythmic pulse, like the distant beating of a massive heart. "This place is alive," Lyra whispered, her staff glowing faintly to illuminate the path. "The shadow's essence is woven into it." Rodan nodded solemnly. "This is no citadel. It's a prison, and its warden awaits." As they descended deeper, the pulse grew louder, resonating through the walls and into their chests. Elric felt the warmth of the blade at his side intensify, as though it responded to the rhythm. He glanced at Rodan. "Is it him?" The skeletal mage's green eyes dimmed slightly. "It's Nairmor." The group emerged into a cavernous chamber. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, and the walls were lined with massive broken chains that hung like the remnants of a great struggle. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform upon which a figure knelt. His armor, once golden and radiant, was tarnished and cracked. His form flickered with shadow, and his head hung low, his fiery eyes dim. "Nairmor," Dane said, his voice heavy with both awe and anger. The figure stirred, rising slowly to his feet. As he turned to face them, the shadows around him coiled and writhed, forming a living shroud. His fiery eyes burned brighter, and his voice rumbled like thunder.
"You should not have come."
"We didn't come to watch you wallow in regret," Kata said, stepping forward with her shield raised. "We came to stop you." The Oathbreaker's gaze swept over the group, his expression unreadable.
"You think you can stop this? The shadow is eternal. I am eternal."
"You weren't always this way," Rodan said, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "You were Elendor's protector, its champion. What happened to you?" Nairmor's fiery eyes flickered for a moment. The shadows around him seemed to recede. His voice, when he spoke, carried a hint of anguish.
"I was betrayed. My oath was pure, my promise unyielding. But when the darkness came, the Council of Elendor sacrificed me to save themselves. They bound me to the shadow, thinking they could contain it. Instead, they unleashed it."
"You broke your oath," Lyra said, her tone sharp. "You let their betrayal consume you."
"And you would not?"
Nairmor roared, the shadows flaring around him.
"You would not strike down those who used you, cast you aside like a tool? My oath was not broken in my hand alone, it was shattered by theirs."
Elric stepped forward, his voice steady despite the trembling in his legs. "They may have betrayed you, but you had a choice, and now you're doing the same to this world." Nairmor's gaze locked onto Elric, and the warmth in Elric's chest flared in response. The Oathbreaker tilted his head slightly.
"You carry the blade of the Oathbreaker, yet you dare lecture me on choice?"
"I carry it because I won't let the shadow win," Elric said, drawing the blade. Its golden light flared, pushing back the shadows in the chamber. "Because I won't make the same mistakes you did." Nairmor let out a roar, and the chamber trembled. The shadows around him surged, forming massive tendrils that lashed out at the group. Kata raised her shield, deflecting one tendril as Dane charged forward, his blade slashing through another. Lyra unleashed a burst of fire, the flame searing through the darkness, while Kale darted between attacks, his daggers finding weak points in the writhing mass. The Oathbreaker moved with unnatural speed, his corrupted blade meeting Dane's strike in a power of sparks.
You fight well, knight.
Naramor said, his voice filled with a twisted admiration.
But you cannot defeat me. The shadow strengthens me.
Then we'll weaken it, Lyra shouted, her staff glowing brightly as she channeled a spell. Runes flared on the walls of the chamber, and the chains that hung from above began to glow faintly. The chains, Rodan said, his voice rising with urgency. They were used to bind him. If we can restore them...
No!
Naramor bellowed, the shadows around him surging.
You will not bind me again!
The battle intensified as the group split their focus. While Dane and Kada and Kale kept Naramor occupied, Rordran and Lyra worked to reactivate the chains. Corrin moved between them, casting protective wards and healing wounds as the group strained against the Oathbreaker's overwhelming power. Elric! Rodan shouted. The blade! It's the key! Use it to channel the chains! Elric's heart pounded as he dodged a shadowy tendril. He looked at the glowing chains and then to the blade in his hand. The warmth in his chest burned hotter, and he felt the faint echo of Naramor's anguish within him. He sprinted toward the center of the platform, dodging Naramor's attacks as Kada shielded him from a devastating strike. Reaching the base of the chains, Elric raised the blade high, its golden light flaring brighter than ever before. I won't let the shadow take this world, he shouted, driving the blade into the platform. The chains came to life, their light surging through the chamber. They lashed out, wrapping around Naramor's form. The Oathbreaker roared, his fiery eyes blazing as the shadows around him dissipated.
You think this will save you?
He bellowed.
The shadow cannot be destroyed?
The chains tightened, their light overwhelming, and Naramor collapsed to his knees. The shadows dissolved, leaving only the broken figure of a man in tarnished armor. As the light faded, the group stood in silence, their breaths ragged. Naramor knelt before them, his fiery eyes dim. He looked up at Elric, his voice no longer booming, but filled with quiet sorrow.
You have done what I could not,
he said.
But the shadow remains. It always will.
We'll be ready, Elric said, lowering the blade. And this time, it won't consume us. Naramor nodded faintly, his form beginning to fade.
Carry the blade well, Elric of Thornmere, and remember, it is not power that defines a hero, but the choices they make.
With that, the Oathbreaker dissolved into light, leaving the chamber silent once more. The group stood together, the weight of their journey settling over them. The citadel was quiet, but they knew the shadow was not truly gone. We've won a battle, Rodan said, leaning on his staff, but the war is far from over. Elric looked at the blade in his hand, its golden glow, faint but steady. Then we'll fight, he said, his voice resolute. The group turned and began their ascent from the citadel. Though the shadow's heart had been quelled, the road ahead remained uncertain. Yet together they carried the hope of a world that had nearly been lost, and the strength to face whatever lay ahead.